Hello and welcome back to Learn the Bible in a Year for March 25th, 2026. Today is Tolkien Reading Day. This is Tolkien, J.R.R. Tolkien, who wrote the Hobbit books and the Lord of the Rings books. So if you ever wanted an excuse to sit in a comfy chair, drink tea, and pretend that you're a hobbit, avoiding responsibilities, today is your day. Just don't let any wizards drag you into an adventure. Today we're going to be covering the strange purification ritual that's found in Numbers, the tragic death of Miriam and Aaron. We're also going to cover Jesus clashing with the Pharisees over the Sabbath, and then finally, wisdom calling out in the streets. We'll read at the end there. So let's dive right in. Yesterday in our Old Testament reading, we saw God confirm Aaron's priesthood with a budding staff after a deadly plague. Today, God gives a specific law for dealing with the constant reality of death in the camp, and then we fast forward nearly 40 years to the end of their wilderness wandering. So God gives Moses and Aaron the instructions for the water of cleansing. Because the older generation is currently dying off in the wilderness under God's judgment, the camp is constantly dealing with the defilement of dead bodies. To handle this, God commands them to find a flawless red heifer that has never been yoked. Eleazar, the priest, is to take it outside the camp and slaughter it. The entire animal is buried along with a cedar wood, hyssop, and scarlet yarn. The ashes are then gathered and kept outside the camp to be mixed with water. The water is sprinkled on anyone who touches a dead body, purifying them on the third and seventh days. Now, a question you might have here, which is a question that I have, how is it that the priest who performs this cleansing ritual not become unclean himself? This is actually a profound paradox in the law. The very act that creates the purifying ashes makes the one who prepares them temporarily unclean. It points to a deep spiritual truth. Dealing with sin and death always costs something. It's a shadow of what Jesus would eventually do. He, who is the perfect pure one, took on our impurity, becoming unclean, I put that into air quotes, with our sin on the cross so that we could be washed clean. So the narrative then jumps forward to the first month of the 40th year. The Israelites arrive at the desert of Zin, and Miriam, Moses' sister, dies and is buried there. Almost immediately, the new generation starts acting exactly like the old one. There's no water, so they gather against Moses and Aaron, wishing they had died with their brothers and complaining about being brought to this terrible place. God tells Moses to take his staff, gather the assembly, and speak to the rock before their eyes, promising it will pour out water. But Moses is exhausted and angry. He gathers the people and shouts, "Listen, you rebels, must we bring you water out of this rock?" And then, instead of speaking to it, he strikes the rock twice with his staff, and water gushes out. But God's judgment is swift. Because Moses and Aaron did not trust God enough to honor him as holy before the people, they are told that they will not be the ones to lead the Israelites into the promised land. So there's an interesting theology on this portion of scripture. Now, I'm not saying that this is definitely true, but it is something to consider. Now, what Moses did here is that he struck the rock instead of speaking to it, which is what made water come out, and that was disobeying God. And because he disobeyed God, now he's not allowed into the promised land. There is a theology that says that striking a rock was actually a metaphor, and the metaphor was that Moses actually killed a person. He actually sacrificed a person for water, right? Now, this would have been a very common practice to do in pagan cultures, right? It was very, very common in all the cultures around Israel that if they wanted something like rain or water or some sort of provision, that the gods, the pagan gods, would require a sacrifice. And so human sacrificing was very, very common, right? And so there is a theology that says that what Moses actually did here was sacrifice a person to get this water, and that is why Moses is not allowed into the promised land, right? That's kind of just a side tangent, a little side quest for today. I'm not saying that that's absolutely true, but there is a theology that does go deeper into that. You can look into that deeper if you would like to, but I find that to be Definitely interesting, and that would make a lot more sense to me on why Moses is not allowed into the promised land, right? Simply striking a rock versus talking to it doesn't seem, I guess, severe enough to keep him out of the promised land, but murdering a person and being like the pagan cultures, well, that might just do it. So, anyways, food for thought there. You could dive deeper into that on your own time if you want to. Now, shortly after this, the kingdom of Edom refuses to let Israel pass through their territory, forcing them to take a longer route. They arrive at Mount Hor, where God announces it is time for Aaron to die. Moses takes Aaron and his son Eleazar up on the mountain. Moses strips Aaron of his priestly garments and puts them on Eleazar, officially transferring the high priesthood. Aaron dies there on the mountain, and the whole camp mourns for 30 days. As they move on, they face an attack from the king of Arad, but this time they rely on God and they make a vow to him, and he gives them victory. Much more to come in this Old Testament story, but we're going to jump into the New Testament for today. Now, last time in Luke, Jesus shocked the religious leaders by forgiving a paralyzed man's sin and eating with tax collectors. Today, the tension escalates as Jesus challenges their deeply held traditions about fasting and the Sabbath. The Pharisees and the teachers of the law come to Jesus with a complaint. They point out that John the Baptist's disciples and their own disciples often fast and pray, but Jesus' disciples are always eating and drinking. And Jesus answers them with a wedding analogy. He asks, "Can you make the guests of the bridegroom fast while he is with them?" Jesus is saying that his presence on earth is a time of celebration, not mourning. But he adds that the time will come when the bridegroom will be taken away, and then they will fast. He follows this up with a parable about not tearing a patch from a new garment to fix the old one, and not pouring old wine into new wineskins. The new wine of his kingdom and grace cannot be contained within the rigid, brittle structures of the old Pharisaical system. It requires a completely new way of living. The conflict deepens on the Sabbath. Jesus and his disciples are walking through grain fields, and the disciples are picking heads of grain, rubbing them in their hands, and eating the kernels. The Pharisees immediately accuse them of doing what is unlawful on the Sabbath. Now, they weren't stealing. The law actually allowed plucking grain from a neighbor's field, but the Pharisees considered the rubbing of the grain to be threshing, which is forbidden work on the Sabbath. And Jesus answers them by pointing to David, who, when he and his men were hungry, entered the house of God and ate the consecrated bread that only priests were allowed to eat. Jesus then makes a massive claim. He says, "The Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath." He's declaring that he has the authority to define what the Sabbath is actually for. Now, on another Sabbath, Jesus is teaching in a synagogue, and there is a man with a shriveled right hand. The Pharisees are watching Jesus closely to see if he will heal on the Sabbath, looking for a reason to accuse him. Now, Jesus knows exactly what they're thinking, but he tells the man to stand up in front of everyone. Then Jesus asks the religious leaders a piercing question: which is lawful on the Sabbath, to do good or to do evil, to save a life or to destroy it? And they give Jesus no answer, which is pretty common for the Pharisees. Jesus looks around at them, tells the man to stretch out his hand, and is completely restored. Instead of rejoicing at this incredible miracle, the Pharisees are furious and begin discussing what they might do to Jesus. They are so blinded by their rules that they miss the Lord of the rules standing right in front of them. This is the constant theme with the Pharisees, right? The Pharisees' entire identity is of these rules and regulations. Most of these rules and regulations, by the way, are not found in the Old Testament, like the book of Numbers that we're reading through right now. These rules and regulations are not found there. These are extra rules, extra regulations that these religious leaders have made up over the centuries. It's just a way to be able to build a fence around the law and having more rules and more regulations on the people. And so when Jesus shows up, it seems, I guess, from their perspective, that he's, air quotes, breaking the rules. But Jesus is pointing out these aren't the rules. These are your own rules that you've made yourself to control people. And Jesus isn't about that. And we're going to finish up reading Proverbs 8, verses 1 through 11, and it goes like this: Does not wisdom call out? Does not understanding raise her voice? At the highest point along the way, where the paths meet, she takes her stand. Beside the gate leading into the city, at the entrance, she cries aloud. To you, O people, I call out. I raise my voice to all mankind. You who are simple, gain prudence. You who are foolish, set your hearts on it. Listen, for I have trustworthy things to say. I open my lips to speak what is right. My mouth speaks what is true, for my lips detest wickedness. All the words of my mouth are just, none of them is crooked or perverse. To the discerning, all of them are right. They are upright to those who have found knowledge. Choose my instruction instead of silver, knowledge rather than choice gold. For wisdom is more precious than rubies, and nothing you desire can compare with her. Alrighty, just a quick word from our wonderful sponsor, which is Covenant Security Equipment. Covenant Security Equipment is a Christian-owned company who partners with building contractors as well as homeowners who build with safety in mind. So they sell things like bullet-resistant windows, secure transaction systems, drive-through installations, and much, much more. I literally can't list all the things that they do, but if this is interesting to you, if you care about security in your home or in your business, go to covenantsecurityequipment.com and check out all the stuff that they do over there. And also, if you haven't done so already, pick up a copy of the Learn the Bible in a Year workbook. The digital version of this book is totally for free. Pick that up in the show notes. There's a link there. You can also get the paperback version. That's the one that I prefer. That's also in the show notes. So go check that out. Alrighty, what was your main takeaway from today's reading? My main takeaway was how Jesus communicated with the Pharisees, right? The Pharisees have rules and they're so rigid and they're so structured with their rules. And they believe that their own salvation, their own self worth is completely tied to how well they keep these rules and regulations, most of which are totally made up by the Pharisees and religious leaders over thousands of years. Jesus is pointing out this new kingdom. It's not about rules and regulations. It's about having a relationship with Jesus. There are people that have a relationship with Jesus in this story, his disciples, tax collectors, prostitutes, the people who desperately need Jesus. They're building a relationship with him. And these Pharisees are rejecting that notion. They're clinging on to this idea that if they just continue to do these air quotes good works, then that is their ticket to salvation. And Jesus is saying, nope, that's not the way that it works. You have to have a relationship with me. It's a good reminder for us listening today. It's all about having a relationship with Jesus. Anything that I missed, anything that stood out to you, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comment section if you would. And also do me a favor, I've been doing this podcast here every single day since the beginning of the year. If you've enjoyed this podcast or it's been helpful to you at all, wherever it is that you listen to this podcast, whether it's on YouTube or Spotify or Apple Podcast or Alexa or wherever you're listening to it, do me a favor and click the star button, 5 stars, thumbs up, you know, all the good buttons and metrics. That really helps the show be put in front of more people. And really, that's the goal, is to share the name of Jesus all around the world. That's the whole point of this show. And by you clicking those thumbs up buttons or the 5 star buttons, and that really helps us do that. So I'd appreciate it if you would take the time to do that right now. Alrighty, well, that is the show for today. We went a little bit long today, but I will see all of you cool cats again here tomorrow.